The old cowboy thought he was saving one dying woman from the freezing wilderness. He had no idea that one act of kindness would place him at the center of a moment that could change his life forever. 3 days after bringing the unconscious Apache woman to his ranch, he woke to the thunder of hoofbeats. Looking outside, his heart nearly stopped. More than 200 Apache warriors had surrounded his home. Were they there for revenge, or for something he never could have imagined? Stay with me, because the truth behind their arrival is far more emotional and unforgettable than anyone expected. The winter had arrived without mercy. A bitter wind swept across the high desert of Arizona, carrying snow through the tall pine trees and over the empty valleys. Ranchers across the region stayed close to their homes, knowing that anyone caught outside for too long could lose their life to the cold. Ethan Carter pulled the collar of his worn coat higher as he guided his horse through the white landscape. At 38 years old, he had spent most of his life working this rugged land. Years of hard work had left lines on his face, but they had never hardened his heart. His small ranch sat miles from the nearest town. Since losing his wife to illness several years earlier, silence had become his closest companion. He filled his days caring for his cattle, repairing fences, and helping travelers whenever they crossed his path. People often told him he was too kind for a place where survival came first. Ethan simply believed that every life deserved compassion. That morning, he had ridden out to check on a small herd after the storm. The snow reached nearly to his horse's knees, making every step slow and careful. As he crossed a narrow ridge, something unusual caught his attention. A line of faint footprints stretched across the fresh snow. He frowned. No rancher would be traveling alone in weather like this. Sliding from his saddle, Ethan knelt beside the tracks. They were smaller than his own and uneven, as though the person had been struggling to stay on their feet. He quietly followed the trail through scattered trees until it disappeared behind a rocky hillside. There, partly covered by drifting snow, lay a young woman. She wore traditional Apache clothing that was dusted with ice. Her long dark braid rested across her shoulder, and her face had become pale from the freezing air. She was barely conscious, her breathing slow and shallow. For a long moment Ethan stood still. He knew many settlers who would have turned away after seeing who she was. Fear and old stories had built deep walls between their communities. But as he looked at the young woman lying alone in the snow, he did not see an enemy. He saw another human being whose life was slipping away. Without another thought, Ethan removed his heavy blanket from the saddle and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. He carefully lifted her into his arms and placed her across his horse, making sure she was secure before beginning the long ride home. As the wind howled behind them, Ethan urged his horse forward. He had no idea that this single act of kindness would soon bring the greatest surprise his quiet ranch had ever known. By the time Ethan reached his ranch, the last light of day had disappeared behind the mountains. He led his horse into the barn before carefully carrying the young woman inside the cabin. The warmth from the stone fireplace slowly chased away the cold that had followed them home. He placed extra blankets over her and set a pot of water near the fire. Through the night, he stayed awake, checking on her from time to time. Whenever she seemed restless, he added another log to the fire and made sure she was comfortable. The next morning, her eyes slowly opened. For a brief moment, confusion filled her face as she looked around the unfamiliar room. Then she noticed Ethan standing a respectful distance away with a cup of warm broth in his hands. "You are safe," he said gently. "You were caught in the storm." She studied him in silence before quietly accepting the cup. "My name is Ayanna," she said after a long pause. "Ethan Carter," he replied with a small smile. "Welcome to my ranch." Over the next 2 days, Ayanna regained her strength. Ethan never asked more questions than she wished to answer. Instead, he focused on helping her recover. He prepared simple meals, brought fresh water, and gave her time to rest. As trust slowly grew, Ayanna shared her story. She had left her village to gather healing plants for an elderly woman who had become ill. While returning home, the storm arrived without warning. The heavy snow covered every familiar trail until she became completely lost. "I thought I would never see my family again," she admitted softly. Ethan understood that feeling better than most. He spoke quietly about the loneliness that had followed the loss of his wife and how living alone had taught him the value of every act of kindness. Neither of them noticed the distant figures watching from a rocky ridge beyond the ranch. Hidden among the pine trees, several Apache scouts had found Ayana's trail. After confirming she was alive, they turned their horses toward the mountains. Before sunrise, they would return with others. Neither Ethan nor Ayana knew that their peaceful conversation was only the beginning of a much larger story. On the third morning, Ethan woke before sunrise to a deep rumble outside. At first he thought another storm was moving through the valley. Then the sound grew louder. It was not thunder. It was the steady beat of hundreds of horse hooves. He stepped onto the porch and looked across the open land. His breath caught. Riders stretched across the hillside as far as he could see. Nearly 200 Apache warriors sat quietly on horseback, surrounding the ranch in complete silence. The first light of morning reflected across the snow, giving the scene an almost unreal stillness. Ethan's heart raced. There was nowhere to run, and he had no desire to hide. He slowly removed his hat as a sign of respect and remained standing on the porch. The riders did not move. Then one horse stepped forward. An older Apache chief rode calmly toward the cabin. His face was steady, and his eyes searched the porch before looking toward the cabin door. At that moment, the door opened. Ayana stepped outside. For one brief second, no one spoke. Then her face lit with joy. "Father," she called. She hurried across the yard toward the chief. He climbed down from his horse and embraced her with quiet relief. The long search was finally over. The warriors watched in silence as Ayana turned and pointed toward Ethan. She told them that this rancher had found her in the snow, carried her to safety, and cared for her without asking for anything in return. The chief walked toward Ethan and stopped only a few steps away. Instead of anger, he placed his hand over his heart and gave a respectful nod. "It takes great courage to help a stranger," he said. "Our people will never forget what you have done." In that single moment, fear gave way to respect, and a new chapter began for everyone standing in the snowy valley. Later that afternoon, the Apache chief invited Ethan to visit their village. Although he felt uncertain, Ethan accepted. Ayana rode beside him as they crossed the snowy valley. When they arrived, families gathered to welcome the riders home. Children ran to greet Ayana, and elders smiled with quiet relief after seeing her safe. The chief stood before the community and spoke with gratitude. He told everyone how Ethan had found Ayana alone in the freezing wilderness and had cared for her without expecting anything in return. As a sign of respect, the chief presented Ethan with a beautifully crafted necklace made of polished stones and carefully shaped beads. It was a symbol of friendship and trust, given only to those who had earned the tribe's deepest respect. Ethan accepted the gift with humility. "I only did what I hoped someone would do for me," he replied. The chief smiled. "Kindness has a way of returning to the one who gives it." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Ethan looked around the village and realized something remarkable had happened. A single act of compassion had opened the door to understanding between two people who had once lived as strangers. He knew he would never forget this day. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melted from the hills and fresh green grass covered the valley once again. Life returned to the land, but something else had changed as well. Ethan and the Apache community remained in touch. From time to time, Ayana and several members of her family visited the ranch, bringing fresh fruit, woven blankets, and warm smiles. Ethan welcomed them with simple meals and stories from the ranch. What had begun as an unexpected meeting grew into a lasting friendship built on trust and respect. Word of their friendship spread across the region. Many people who had once believed old rumors began to see a different picture. They watched neighbors helping one another during difficult seasons and realized that kindness could overcome fear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the distant mountains, Ayana stood beside Ethan outside the ranch house. "You saved more than my life," she said softly. "You reminded all of us that one good choice can change many lives." Ethan looked across the peaceful valley, where horses grazed quietly and the evening breeze carried the scent of fresh earth. "I almost rode past those footprints," he admitted. "I am thankful I did not." They shared a quiet smile as the first stars appeared overhead. Sometimes the greatest changes begin with a single decision. Ethan had simply chosen to help someone in need. That choice brought two communities closer together and proved that compassion, courage, and respect can leave a legacy that lasts far beyond one winter's day. Ethan never expected that following a set of fading footprints through the snow would change his life forever. What began as a simple act of kindness became a story of trust, gratitude, and hope. It reminds us that compassion has the power to cross even the deepest divides and that one selfless decision can inspire lasting friendship. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. We hope this story touched your heart and reminded you that even in the coldest moments, kindness can light the way. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming Wild West stories filled with courage, hope, and unforgettable moments. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new adventure. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you had found Ayana alone in the snow? We would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to sharing another inspiring story with you soon.